Elizabeth Parker had never expected her life to feel so still at 46. After years of working long hospital shifts as an administrative coordinator, raising her daughter alone, and finally marrying again, she thought steady days would bring comfort. But when summer arrived and her stepson Ryan returned to college, the house settled into a silence that felt too heavy, too slow, almost like life was waiting for something to shake it awake. One Tuesday afternoon, while she was sorting mail at the kitchen counter, her phone buzzed with a message that made her blink twice. It was from Daniel Hayes, Rianne's longtime friend, the boy who used to track mud through her living room and stay for dinner uninvited. Now fully grown and living his adult life, his message was short, polite, and strangely formal. "Hi, Ms. Parker. I'm back in town for a bit. I could use your advice on something. If you have time, could you stop by my place?" Elizabeth stared at the screen, not because the message was inappropriate, but because it felt unexpectedly serious. Daniel had never reached out to her directly, not even when he dropped by with Ryan in the past. There was something different in the tone, something that made her pulse beat a little faster without her permission. She tried to laugh at herself. It was probably nothing a job question, maybe something about life direction. She told herself not to overthink it, but her thoughts moved faster than she could slow them. Why her? Why now? Was he struggling with something? Was Ryan involved in some kind of trouble? The possibilities flickered through her mind, pushing her toward curiosity more than anything else. She typed a reply before she could talk herself out of it, trying to sound casual. "Sure, I can stop by. What time works for you?" When he responded almost instantly, "Any time today is fine." Her stomach tightened in a way she didn't expect. Not in fear, but in anticipation she didn't fully understand. She hurried to get ready, brushing her hair twice, checking her reflection once more than necessary, telling herself it was simply about being polite. She grabbed her keys, stepped into the warm air, and drove toward the neighborhood on the north side of town, where Daniel's parents had lived since he was a kid. The closer she got to the familiar street, the more a strange mix of nostalgia and unease grew inside her. She had spent years dropping Ryan off here for sleepovers, birthday parties, and late-night video game marathons. Walking back into that world as an adult felt oddly emotional, as if she were stepping into a memory she no longer belonged in. When she pulled up in front of the small, pale blue house, she was surprised by how quiet the place looked. No cars except Daniel's, no porch lights, no movement behind the windows. It felt almost too still, as if the house itself had paused to listen. She knocked softly, expecting a moment of wait, but the door opened almost immediately. Daniel stood there in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, older, taller, more defined than she remembered, but with those same steady eyes that always seemed to see more than he said. He smiled a soft, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for coming, Ms. Parker." "Elizabeth," she corrected gently. "You're an adult now. Ms. Parker makes me feel ancient." He actually laughed, a brief but warm sound that eased the tension in her shoulders. He stepped aside, letting her enter. The house felt different from her memories, quieter, a bit dim. Boxes stacked in the living room as if someone was halfway through leaving or halfway through staying. She looked around, trying to understand the mood hanging in the air. "Everything okay?" she asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, something he used to do as a teen when he felt nervous. "It's been a long week," he admitted. "I didn't want to bother anyone, but I wasn't sure who else to talk to." His honesty hit her harder than she expected. There was something raw in his voice, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just real in a way most people avoided. "What's going on?" she asked, keeping her tone calm, ready to listen the way she always did at work when patients needed steady grounding. He gestured toward the living room. "My parents are selling the house. I'm clearing out the last of my stuff. Thought it'd be simple. It's not." She followed him further inside, and the details began to sink in the half-packed boxes. The old family photos laid out on the table. The childhood soccer trophy lying on its side. It looked like a life paused mid-transition. "That's a big change," she said gently. "You grew up here." "Yeah. And suddenly it's supposed to be gone." He sat on the arm of the couch, not fully relaxing. Ryan's busy with his internship. My parents are already in Arizona, and he shook his head. Needed someone who remembers this place. Someone who remembers me before everything got complicated. She didn't expect the comment to stir something emotional in her, but it did. She remembered him clearly bright, kind, quiet, always a little more thoughtful than the other boys. She remembered the way he used to help carry groceries from her car, even when he wasn't asked. The way he always said thank you after dinner. She remembered him growing from a shy teenager into a young man who never quite realized how gentle he was. And looking at him now, sitting in a half-empty home that once held his whole world. She felt a wave of empathy so strong it surprised her. "I'm here," she said simply. "Tell me what you need." Those words seemed to ease something inside him. He stood, opened one of the boxes, and handed her an old photo album covered in dust. "I guess. Someone to help me go through this without losing my mind." Elizabeth smiled, flipping open the first page. A younger Daniel, missing 2 teeth, grinning beside Ryan at a school carnival. The pictures continued muddy soccer fields, ice cream-stained t-shirts, school plays, birthday cake disasters. As they sorted the albums, she felt time speeding up around them. Memories unfolding fast, emotions rising faster. There was no awkwardness, only a strange closeness that came naturally. As if the years between them had rearranged themselves into something new. And all the while, at the back of her mind, a quiet question whispered, why her? Why now? Why did he look at her with that mix of trust and vulnerability that felt deeper than casual friendship? She didn't know the answer. Not yet. But she sensed something was coming, a truth. A shift. Something that would shake the quiet rhythm of her days. And it all began with that single message she never expected to receive. Elizabeth followed Daniel through the house, stepping carefully around half-packed boxes and old furniture that smelled faintly of dust and memory. The living room was brighter than she remembered, sunlight spilling through windows that framed the backyard where she had once watched Ryan and Daniel run across the lawn, laughing until they were out of breath. Daniel led her past the hallway, lined with framed photographs, each one a frozen moment of childhood and family life. And Elizabeth felt a surprising surge of nostalgia mixed with melancholy. He moved with a quiet tension, lifting boxes and shifting items as if every object held a memory he wasn't ready to let go of. And she tried to keep pace, offering gentle suggestions and light comments to ease the air. "Do you remember this?" she asked at one point, holding up a photo of Ryan and Daniel from a school talent show. The boys' messy hair and wide smiles reminding her how fast time had passed. He nodded, brushing dust from the edges, a faint smile crossing his face. But his eyes were clouded with something heavier, a kind of longing Elizabeth couldn't place. As they worked through the boxes, unpacking memories, Daniel began talking quietly about the past, sharing little stories she hadn't heard before, moments that made her laugh and shake her head in disbelief. He described pranks Ryan had pulled, the way they had sneaked ice cream from the freezer late at night, the chaos of birthday parties that seemed simple at the time but now felt like treasures. She listened, drawn in by his calm, steady voice and the way he seemed to trust her with details of a life that belonged to him alone. Elizabeth noticed small changes too. He had grown taller, broader in the shoulders, more composed than the boy she remembered. Yet there was still a softness to him, a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside her. She caught herself stealing glances when he wasn't looking, noticing the way sunlight highlighted the edges of his hair, the quiet strength in his hands as he lifted boxes, the thoughtful way he examined each object before deciding whether to keep or let it go. Despite herself, she felt an unexpected pull, a gentle tension that made the mundane task of unpacking and sorting feel charged with unspoken meaning. At one point, they reached a box filled with old letters and notes, carefully tied with ribbon and faded with age. Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the bundle, and Elizabeth felt the moment stretch longer than it should. "These were my parents' letters to each other," he said softly. "Reading them now feels different. I didn't realize how much they shaped me until I had to let this all go." Elizabeth nodded, understanding more than he expected. "Sometimes letting go is harder than we think," she said. "It's not about forgetting, it's about carrying what matters forward." He smiled faintly, the first real warmth in his expression since she arrived. "You always know what to say," he admitted, a hint of admiration in his voice that made Elizabeth's heart flutter. They moved to the dining room, where the table was cluttered with objects from another era: trophies, old board games, mismatched plates. She noticed the care he took in placing each item aside, handling them like fragile memories. And it made her feel protective of him in a way she hadn't expected. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, their conversation drifted from childhood to dreams and fears. Daniel spoke of the future, his plans, his uncertainties, the anxiety of stepping into a world that felt both promising and overwhelming. Elizabeth shared pieces of her own journey, moments of doubt and hope, and the connection between them deepened. There was no rush, no pressure, only the natural unfolding of two people recognizing familiarity and trust in each other. Then, as they reached a box of Ryan's old-school notebooks, their hands brushed for the first time in a meaningful way. It was a fleeting touch, almost accidental, yet both felt a spark of emotion they hadn't anticipated. Elizabeth quickly withdrew her hand, pretending to adjust the notebooks, while Daniel's gaze lingered on hers for a moment longer than usual, and the room seemed charged with unspoken words. She reminded herself to stay grounded. He was Ryan's friend, an adult navigating his own life. And she had her own boundaries to maintain, but a small part of her refused to let go of the feeling. They continued sorting, laughing softly at old jokes, sharing stories of summers that felt like lifetimes ago. Yet the air between them carried a quiet tension, a delicate awareness of emotions that neither had expected to surface. The sun finally began to set, painting the walls in hues of gold and orange. And Daniel suggested taking a break on the back porch. Elizabeth agreed, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness as they stepped outside. The porch overlooked the backyard, now overgrown with the neglect of weeks and months. But the view brought a surprising sense of peace. They sat side by side, sipping iced tea, a quiet only interrupted by the occasional chirp of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic. Daniel spoke again, more candidly this time, about how the house felt like a reflection of his past and his struggle to let it go. Elizabeth listened intently, offering gentle words of encouragement, but inside, she felt something stirring on emotion that was soft yet undeniable, a warmth she hadn't expected to feel toward him. He thanked her not just for the help with the boxes, but for being present, for understanding without judgment, for simply listening. Elizabeth realized that in this brief encounter, the simple act of helping him navigate memories had opened something in both of them. The day had started as a casual visit, a favor for Ryan's friend. Yet it had transformed into an emotional journey neither had anticipated. She felt a connection that was tender, respectful, and complex. And though she knew boundaries were important, she couldn't ignore the way her heart had quickened, the way the quiet closeness had left an imprint she wouldn't easily forget. As they finally stood to head inside after hours of sorting, both were aware of the shift that had occurred. Not through grand gestures or confessions, but through shared time, empathy, and the vulnerability of facing one's past. Elizabeth felt a mixture of melancholy and warmth, a sense that something significant had begun, something that neither she nor Daniel could fully explain yet. And as she left that evening, the memory of his glance, the weight of the day's conversations, and the brush of their hands lingered in her mind, leaving her unsettled in the best possible way, knowing that her life, though grounded in routine, had quietly shifted, opening a door to emotions she hadn't anticipated and a story that was only beginning. The late afternoon air was warm but carried a hint of autumn as Elizabeth and Daniel stepped onto the back porch, each holding a glass of iced tea. The porch overlooked the backyard that had once been filled with laughter and games, now quiet and overgrown. Yet the space felt intimate in a way that neither had expected. They sat side by side on the worn wooden bench, the soft creak beneath them, a steady rhythm as cicadas buzzed lazily in the trees. and for a few moments neither spoke, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. Daniel finally broke it, his voice low, almost hesitant. Carrying a weight that made Elizabeth sit up straighter, her heart sensing the shift before her mind could process it. "I'm not good at saying things," he began, his gaze fixed on the yard rather than her. "But I feel like I need to be honest about something." Elizabeth looked at him, curious and slightly anxious, wondering what he meant. His hands fidgeted around the rim of the glass, betraying the calm tone of his voice. "I've carried this for years," he continued, "and I don't even know why I never said it before. You probably don't remember, and maybe it doesn't even matter, but I need you to know." He paused, as if searching for the courage to speak exactly what he felt. Elizabeth's chest tightened slightly. There was a mixture of anticipation and unease that made the world narrow around them. And she leaned in slightly, instinctively ready to listen. "When I was younger," he said, finally meeting her eyes, "I always admired you. Not in a childish way. More like I noticed the way you treated people, how you understood things adults usually miss. You cared in a way I couldn't explain." Elizabeth felt a strange warmth spread across her chest, a mixture of surprise and nostalgia. Remembering the quiet guidance she had tried to offer Ryan and his friends over the years. "Daniel," she said gently, "that was years ago. Kids admire adults all the time." "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But when I saw you today going through this house with me, it all came back. I thought I had outgrown it, that I had let it fade. Maybe I didn't." His words hung between them, soft but charged, carrying a weight neither could ignore. Elizabeth's mind raced. She reminded herself firmly that Daniel was Ryan's friend, an adult, someone she had always seen as part of her stepson's world. And yet the honesty in his confession stirred something tender in her heart she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't inappropriate, not in a way that crossed boundaries. But it was real, vulnerable, and emotionally raw, and that made it feel dangerous in its quiet power. She glanced down at her iced tea, feeling the condensation drip onto her hand, and tried to respond calmly. "You're an adult now," she said softly, "and I appreciate your honesty. It means a lot that you trust me with this." He nodded, a small, almost shy smile forming, but the tension didn't leave his posture. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, rushing to clarify. "I just needed you to know. I didn't want to carry it any longer without saying something. You've always been someone I could look up to, someone steady in ways I needed, even if I didn't understand it back then." Elizabeth felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to tell him that life often puts these moments in unexpected ways, that feelings can be acknowledged without needing action, that the heart can recognize beauty and guidance without stepping into temptation. Yet the words felt insufficient, and instead, she reached out lightly to touch his hand, a gesture of understanding and compassion rather than something more. He didn't pull away, and for a heartbeat, their connection lingered. Unspoken, but undeniable. Elizabeth reminded herself of her life, her commitments, the quiet routines she relied on. But she also acknowledged the emotional truth of the moment. Both of them had shared an honesty that was rare, a glimpse of self that didn't hide behind politeness or distraction. Daniel's voice broke the silence again. "I wish I could explain why I feel this way now, but I guess some things just take time to understand," he said, his gaze drifting back to the yard. But the corners of his mouth still hinted at that faint smile. Elizabeth felt her heart respond, not with desire, but with a deep sense of empathy, recognition, and a touch of heartbreak for the boy-turned-man she had watched grow up without fully realizing how profoundly he had perceived her presence in his life. They sat together for a long moment, neither needing to fill the silence, letting the air carry the weight of years, memories, and emotions that words could only partially capture. The sky began to deepen into amber and violet as the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the porch, and Elizabeth felt the fleeting passage of time as something bittersweet. She could sense that this was a turning point. It's a delicate moment where emotions had been revealed, yet neither had acted impulsively or crossed lines. It was a confession wrapped in respect, a shared understanding that both liberated and unsettled her. Suddenly, her phone vibrated against the wooden table, startling both of them. She glanced down and saw her husband's name flashing on the screen. The timing felt almost cruel in its precision, breaking the intimacy of the moment with a reminder of obligations and reality. Daniel noticed the change in her expression and immediately looked apologetic, though he hadn't done anything wrong. "I should let you go," she said softly. Taking a deep breath, "I need to step inside." He nodded, standing up, straightening his shirt, and for a brief moment, Elizabeth caught the intensity in his eyes, a mix of longing, vulnerability, and the quiet acceptance that boundaries existed between them. They exchanged a few more words, light and careful, as if neither wanted to disrupt the fragile balance of emotion that had built up over the afternoon. When she left the porch and walked back toward her car, the evening air felt heavier than before, carrying the unspoken truths of their conversation. Elizabeth's mind replayed Daniel's words, the honesty in his eyes, the tension of their fleeting touch, and she realized that sometimes connections don't need to be acted upon to leave a lasting impact. That night, back at home, she found herself staring out the window, thinking about the soft golden light on the porch, the way Daniel had confessed without expectation, and the profound weight of someone trusting you with feelings that had been hidden for years. She felt a mixture of warmth and melancholy, a realization that hearts could connect deeply, even when the world insisted on boundaries and responsibilities. The quiet of the house no longer felt empty, it felt reflective, charged with emotions that didn't need to cross any line to be meaningful. Elizabeth understood that day had changed her perspective, reminding her that life's most significant moments often come quietly, in honesty, in trust, in subtle gestures, and that sometimes the most profound connections are those that remain unspoken beyond a single touch or confession. She felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing Daniel had released a piece of his heart, and she had received it with care and respect, and that such moments, rare and fleeting, could leave an imprint that lasted far beyond the summer evening when the sun dipped low over a quiet backyard, and two lives brushed together without consequence but with lasting emotional resonance. Asterisk. Elizabeth drove home that evening with a strange mix of heaviness and clarity settling over her. The sun had set completely, leaving the sky a deep navy, dotted with the first stars of the evening, and the quiet hum of her car on the highway felt almost loud compared to the silence she carried inside. She replayed the day in her mind, the boxes, the photos, Daniel's gentle confession on the porch, and the warmth that had unexpectedly bloomed in the quiet moments they had shared. It wasn't a romantic warmth in the usual sense, but something deeper, more tender. A recognition of trust, vulnerability, and understanding that had connected them in a way she hadn't felt in years. She reminded herself firmly of her life, of her husband waiting at home, of Ryan, and of the clear boundaries that existed. Yet the emotions from the afternoon clung stubbornly, refusing to dissipate. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her, not with expectation, not with entitlement, but with honesty, and how that honesty had touched her in a way that was entirely new and quietly unsettling. The next morning, life demanded normality again. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toast, her husband humming softly while reading the paper, and she moved through the motions of breakfast with a calm exterior, though inside her mind wandered back to Daniel, the way he had handled his memories, the subtle spark that had lingered when their hands brushed over old photo albums. She found herself returning to that thought more than once throughout the day, feeling a combination of longing and a gentle melancholy that came with knowing something beautiful could exist without needing to change her current life. A few days passed, and Elizabeth received a small, unmarked envelope in her mailbox. It was simple, neat, and carried the weight of someone's intention. She recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately and carefully opened it inside, curious and cautious. The note inside was brief. "Thank you for being someone I could trust. I'm leaving for a new job in Seattle. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye properly. Daniel." Her breath caught as she read the words, and the quiet ache in her chest returned. A bittersweet combination of pride in him and sadness at the distance that would now grow between them. She understood immediately that this was his way of choosing a future without complicating either of their lives. A decision that required courage, clarity, and a quiet sense of maturity she hadn't fully appreciated until now. Elizabeth folded the note slowly, holding it in her hands as if the paper itself contained a piece of the day's emotions. And she felt an odd comfort in knowing he had released his feelings respectfully and fully, without asking for anything in return. It was the kind of gesture that spoke louder than words. A demonstration of emotional honesty and respect that lingered longer than any conversation could. Over the next week, she found herself thinking about Daniel often, reflecting on the way he had trusted her, the way they had laughed together over old memories, and how something so delicate could create a lasting impression without overstepping any line. She felt a mixture of relief and bittersweet melancholy, realizing that life often gave these moments quietly, without drama, and that their significance lay not in action but in recognition, understanding, and emotional honesty. Elizabeth began to notice small changes in herself. She felt more attuned to the people around her, more patient with Ryan during phone calls from college, more present with her husband when he shared stories of his day. Yet the memory of Daniel's voice, the warmth in his eyes, and the vulnerability he had shown lingered in her chest. A quiet reminder that meaningful connections could arrive unexpectedly, stir emotions deeply, and leave a permanent mark even if nothing tangible had changed. One afternoon, she found herself on the porch again, a mug of tea in hand, reflecting on the day Daniel had confessed and the note he had left. The wind stirred the trees gently, and Elizabeth felt a wave of gratitude. Gratitude for his honesty, for the chance to witness his growth, for the realization that emotional intimacy could exist without boundaries being crossed, for the reminder that life's lessons often arrive in quiet, subtle ways. She realized, too, that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant recognizing the value of a moment and carrying it forward with care and respect. She could see the path Daniel had chosen for himself, far away in Seattle, and she felt an unexpected swell of pride. He was moving forward, embracing opportunity. And she had been part of that gentle transition, a witness to his vulnerability and his courage. That evening, as she returned inside, Elizabeth found herself smiling softly, understanding that the heart could hold complex emotions of admiration, fondness, longing, and respect all at once, without causing harm or demanding action. It was a lesson in restraint, in empathy, in emotional honesty that neither of them would forget. Days turned into weeks, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Ryan returned from college briefly, and they all shared laughter at the dinner table. But Elizabeth carried within her a quiet depth, a story unspoken yet profoundly felt, a connection that had changed her perspective on trust, vulnerability, and the beauty of moments that exist only in emotional truth. She realized that some stories in life aren't about fulfillment in the traditional sense. They're about recognition, about witnessing another's growth, and about allowing oneself to experience the subtle impact of genuine human connection. The note from Daniel remained on her dresser, tucked safely in a drawer, a reminder of that summer afternoon, the back porch, and the delicate honesty that had been shared. Elizabeth understood that in this world, some relationships are not measured by time or proximity, but by the emotional resonance they leave. And she carried that quietly, feeling richer for it. There was no regret, no longing that demanded action, only a profound awareness of the beauty of trust and respect, of moments that arrive and leave an imprint without needing closure in the usual sense. In the weeks that followed, she noticed herself smiling unexpectedly at little things, a song on the radio, the way sunlight fell on the leaves outside, the memory of Daniel's voice recounting childhood stories. She realized the depth of emotional impact a single person could have, not by changing her life in dramatic ways, but by offering honesty, trust, and a fleeting glimpse into the complexity of human feeling. Elizabeth knew that life would continue, marriage, family, work, but now it carried a subtle richness, a quiet story woven into the fabric of her days. a reminder that emotional truth could be profound even without action, and that the heart's lessons often arrive in whispers rather than shouts. The summer had ended. Daniel was gone, but Elizabeth felt a lasting shift. She had experienced a connection that was tender, respectful, and entirely human, leaving her with a bittersweet warmth that would remain long after the boxes had been unpacked. The photos put away and the note folded carefully in the drawer. It was a story of trust, of letting go, and of quiet emotional resonance, a story that changed her, deepened her, and reminded her that life's most meaningful moments often arrive in the smallest gestures, the softest confessions, and the simplest acts of honesty. She smiled once more, knowing that some connections, though brief and impossible to repeat, leave a permanent mark on the heart, and that the lesson she had learned from Daniel would linger forever in the gentle rhythms of her life.